The judge sentenced me to life in prison, and as the gavel fell, my eyes landed on my wife in the gallery passionately kissing my former business partner. I could barely process the betrayal before hearing her cold whisper to him, "Such a shame, let him rot in prison like the loser he is." Imagine standing there, watching your entire life crumble, framed for a crime you didn't commit, as they drag you away. But just as hope flickered, just as the darkness started to close in, my 6-year-old son slipped a tiny, folded note into my hand. I opened it later, alone in that cold cell. "Don't worry, Dad. Wait for 12 days only. I fixed everything." My heart stopped. I couldn't believe what happened next, what that single note would unravel, a betrayal so deep it still chills me to the bone, and set off a chain of events that no one, especially not them, ever saw coming. I still remember the deafening roar of that industrial press, the way its massive hydraulic arms crushed steel, turning it into something new. For 3 years, that sound, that rhythm, was my life at the Riverside manufacturing plant. At 42, it was a world away from where I'd come from, a stark contrast to the shadows and secrets that used to define every single breath I took. Most of my coworkers, they just saw me as Dave, the quiet guy who showed up on time, kept to himself, never complained. A reliable worker. They had no idea. They couldn't possibly know that beneath my simple blue work shirt, there was a tattoo, a black serpent coiled around a dagger. The mark of Echo Division. The kind of mark that made hardened criminals, the real monsters, cross the street just to avoid you. I was trying to live a normal life, a quiet one, but the past? It was always there, just beneath the surface. Mathis. The voice of Ryan Thompson, the plant manager, cut through the noise, jarring me from my thoughts. He was 38, slick, ambitious, with perfect blonde hair and a suit that probably cost more than I made in a month. He'd been promoted just 6 months ago, bringing with him a whole new level of condescension for the floor workers. I looked up, wiping sweat from my brow. "Yeah, boss?" His smile was thin, too practiced. My gut tightened. My training, all those years processing threats in an instant, immediately flagged something in his eyes, the cold, calculating look of a predator sizing up its prey. "Linda needs to see you in HR, something about your benefits package." I just nodded, my expression neutral, and started the long walk through the maze of machinery and conveyor belts. 200 people worked here, good people, hardworking, dependent on these jobs. It was one of the reasons I'd chosen this place, trying to build something real after leaving my old life behind. My wife, Linda, now Linda Mathis, sat behind her desk in HR, her auburn hair pulled back, professional. She was 35, still beautiful, but something had changed between us over the past few months. Where there used to be warmth, a spark in her green eyes when she looked at me, now there was only distance. A cold, unsettling calculation. "David, sit down," she said, not even looking up from her screen, launching into a rehearsed speech about deductibles and coverage limits for my health insurance. 8 years we'd been married. We met at a coffee shop when I was transitioning out of the military. She was a paralegal then, ambitious, kind. Our courtship was fast, and our marriage, it had been the anchor. The one thing that helped me find stability in this chaotic civilian world. But lately, she was different. Working late. Taking hushed calls in private. And then there was the smell. That faint, lingering scent of expensive cologne that was never mine. My training taught me to notice the details others missed. And Linda? She was leaving plenty of details. "Is that all?" I asked when she finally finished. She looked up, and for a fleeting moment, I saw it, a flicker of guilt, maybe even regret. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that same professional detachment. "That's all for now. I'll have the new paperwork ready by Friday." As I walked back to the factory floor, my mind racing, I passed Thompson's office. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, I saw him on the phone, speaking in urgent, hushed tones. My enhanced hearing, honed by years of surveillance in the darkest corners of the world, caught fragments. Just enough to piece together the chilling truth. "Has to look like an accident. Industrial press tonight, would be perfect." My expression remained unchanged as I kept walking, but my mind was already in combat mode. In Echo Division, survival depended on processing threats and formulating responses in seconds. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Back at my station, I continued my work, but my awareness had shifted. Every sound, every movement around me was catalogued and analyzed. I noticed Thompson kept glancing in my direction. I observed Linda through the glass partition of the HR office, saw how she checked her phone every few minutes, how her fingers drummed nervously on her desk. During my lunch break, I made my way to the parking lot, then circled around to the back of the building, where the loading docks were. Using skills most civilians didn't even know existed, I accessed the building's ventilation system. It was dirty, cramped, but it gave me a vantage point right above Thompson's office. The conversation I overheard next would have shocked most people to their core. For me? I simply absorbed it, filing away every single detail for future use. My husband's a washed-up factory worker. Linda's voice, cold, clear, carried through the thin office walls. Crush him in the industrial press tonight. 2 in his head. No one will question a workplace accident. Thompson's response was equally chilling. Are you sure about this, Linda? There's no going back once we... Linda snapped back, her voice laced with venom. I'm tired of pretending to love him. You promised me we'd be together once he was out of the picture. His life insurance policy will set us up nicely. And with my administrative access, I can make sure the safety protocols show equipment malfunction. Thompson hesitated. What about the investigation? Linda's answer was dismissive. I'll handle the paperwork. David was always careless around machinery. That's what the reports will show. A tragic accident, nothing more. I had heard enough. I silently made my way back to my station, my mind already formulating a plan. These people had no idea who they were dealing with. They saw a simple factory worker, a man they could manipulate and discard. They had never looked closely at the tattoo on my shoulder. Never questioned why a man with my education and bearing was content to work a blue-collar job. That was their first mistake. It would also be their last. As the afternoon shift wound down, I noticed the increased activity around my workstation. Thompson had been by 3 times, checking on safety protocols. Linda had visited the floor twice, something she rarely did. And the maintenance crew? They'd made several suspicious adjustments to the industrial press I operated. I smiled to myself as I cleaned my station. 20 years in Echo Division had taught me that the best defense was often a superior offense. These amateurs thought they were setting a trap. They had no idea they were walking straight into one. As I prepared to clock out, I caught Thompson's eye across the factory floor. The younger man nodded slightly, a gesture meant to seem casual but carrying darker implications. I nodded back, playing my role as the oblivious husband who would soon meet his end. Too bad for them. They never looked closely at my tattoo. The mark of the deadliest operative in Black Ops. They had no idea I was about to put them through the real hell. I sat in my pickup truck in the factory parking lot, engine off, watching the building through my rearview mirror. Most of the day shift had gone home, but Thompson's BMW remained in its designated spot. Linda's Honda was still there, parked in the administrative section. They were probably inside right now, finalizing their murderous plan. I pulled out an encrypted cell phone, a relic from my previous life that I'd kept for emergencies. With practiced fingers, I dialed a number I hadn't called in 3 years. Codeword verification, came the gruff voice on the other end. Echo 77, request immediate background sweep. There was a pause, then the sound of typing. Echo 77, this is Control. Your clearance was revoked upon discharge. Override. Crimson Protocol. Personal threat assessment. Another pause. Longer this time. Crimson Protocol was reserved for situations where an Echo operative's cover had been blown and civilian casualties were imminent. It gave me temporary access to military intelligence resources. Verified. What do you need, David? Complete background on Ryan Michael Thompson. Age 38, current residence 1247, Oakwood Drive. And Linda Marie Riley, maiden name, age 35, my current spouse. Priority flagged. Give me 20 minutes. I ended the call and began preparing for the evening ahead. From a hidden compartment beneath my truck's bench seat, I retrieved a small tactical kit. Items that most people would never recognize, but that could mean the difference between life and death. Lockpicks. Surveillance devices. And a ceramic knife that wouldn't trigger metal detectors. My phone buzzed with an incoming text. The information I'd requested had arrived as encrypted files. What I read made my blood run cold. Ryan Thompson wasn't just an ambitious plant manager. He was the son of Richard Thompson, a former Echo Division commander who had been dishonorably discharged 15 years ago for selling classified information to foreign agents. The younger Thompson had been investigated twice by military intelligence for suspicious contacts with known arms dealers, but charges were never filed due to lack of evidence. Linda's file was equally revealing. Before becoming Linda Riley, she had been Linda Marie Castellano, daughter of Vincent Castellano, a mid-level crime family operator who specialized in insurance fraud. She had legally changed her name at age 25 shortly after her father's conviction for racketeering. Her paralegal credentials were legitimate, but her employment history showed a pattern of accessing confidential information that had later been compromised. I stared at my phone screen, pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. Our meeting hadn't been coincidence. Our marriage wasn't built on love. I had been marked from the beginning, targeted by professionals who knew exactly what they were doing. The factory's night shift was smaller, only about 40 workers to maintain essential operations. I knew the building's layout intimately, not just from my 3 years of employment, but from the detailed reconnaissance I'd conducted during my first week. Old habits from Echo Division died hard. At 9 p.m., I made my move. I entered the building through a service entrance that most employees didn't know existed, using a master key card I'd cloned months earlier. My footsteps were silent as I made my way through the darkened corridors toward the administrative section. Thompson's office was empty, but I could hear voices coming from the conference room down the hall. Through the partially open door, I could see Linda and Thompson hunched over building schematics, pointing at specific locations and discussing timing. The press operates on a 15-minute cycle, Thompson was saying. If David's working the late shift tonight, we can trigger a malfunction at exactly 10:47 p.m. The safety systems will show a mechanical failure, and the hydraulic pressure will do the rest. What about the security cameras? Linda asked. I've already arranged for a technical glitch in the recording system. The footage will show static for that exact time frame. Very convenient. I moved closer, my training allowing me to remain invisible in the shadows. I activated a small recording device and captured their entire conversation. Evidence that would be useful later. There's just one thing that bothers me, Linda continued. David's been acting strange lately. More alert, like he's watching us. Thompson laughed, a derisive sound. He's a factory worker, Linda. These blue-collar types aren't exactly criminal masterminds. He probably suspects you're having an affair. Nothing more. Linda paused. Maybe, but there's something about him. Sometimes when I look at him, I see something in his eyes, like he's calculating, analyzing. Thompson chuckled. You're overthinking this. By tomorrow morning, David Mathis will be yesterday's news, and we'll be planning our new life together. I had heard enough. I retreated through the corridors and made my way to the factory floor. The night shift supervisor, Hal Lake, was making his rounds. I'd worked with Hal during several overtime shifts and knew him to be a decent man with a wife and 3 kids. Hey, Hal, I called out as I approached. Got a minute? David, what are you doing here? You're not scheduled tonight. That's what I need to talk to you about. I got a call from Thompson about an hour ago. He wants me to run a special job on Press 4. Said it was a rush order for a big client. Hal frowned. That's weird. I didn't get any paperwork about a special job, and Press 4 has been acting up lately. Maintenance tagged it for service tomorrow. That's what I thought was strange, too. Mind if I take a look at the work orders? We walked to Hal's office where I quickly scanned the duty roster and maintenance reports. As expected, there was no legitimate work order for Press 4. But there were several maintenance notes about hydraulic pressure irregularities that had developed over the past week. Now, I need to ask you a favor, I said, my voice taking on a more serious tone. I want you to take your crew and do a complete safety inspection of Press 4 right now. Document everything. Hydraulic pressure, safety interlocks, emergency shutdown systems. Hal looked at me, confused. Why? What's going on, David? I looked at my colleague, a man I'd grown to respect. Someone's been tampering with that machine, and they're planning to use it to hurt somebody tonight. Hal's expression darkened. Are you serious? Who would? I can't explain everything right now, but I need you to trust me. And Hal? Whatever you do, don't let anyone else near that press until the police arrive. Police? David? What the hell is going on? Just trust me. And when they ask you questions later, tell them exactly what you found during your inspection. Document everything. I left Hal to his work and positioned myself in a concealed location overlooking the factory floor. At 10:30 p.m., Thompson appeared, dressed in dark clothing, moving with the careful steps of someone who didn't want to be seen. He made his way directly to Press 4. I watched through night vision goggles as Thompson accessed the machine's control panel. The man clearly knew what he was doing. His movements were practiced, professional. Within minutes, he had bypassed several safety systems and adjusted the hydraulic pressure to dangerous levels. At exactly 10:47 p.m., Thompson triggered the press's emergency cycle. The massive machine roared to life, its hydraulic arm slamming down with tremendous force. If I had been standing in my normal position, I would have been crushed instantly. Instead, Thompson found himself staring at an empty workstation. And then he heard slow, deliberate applause coming from behind him. I stepped out of the shadows, my hands clapping mockingly. Very impressive, Ryan. Your father would be proud. Of course, Richard Thompson always was better at betraying people than actually killing them. Thompson spun around, his face pale with shock. How do you? Who are you? I smiled. And for the first time, Thompson saw something in my eyes that made him take an involuntary step backward. I'm the man you tried to murder tonight. But more importantly, I'm Echo 77, and you just made the biggest mistake of your miserable life. The industrial press continued its deadly cycle, hydraulic arms crushing empty air where I should have been standing. Thompson backed away from the machine, his face a mask of confusion and growing terror as my words sank in. Echo 77. Thompson's voice cracked. That's impossible. You're just a washed-up factory worker. My smile was predatory. That's what your girlfriend called me. My husband's a washed-up factory worker, she said. Crush him in the industrial press tonight. 2 in his head. No one will question a workplace accident. Thompson's eyes widened, realization dawning. You heard? I heard everything. I began walking toward him with measured steps. I know about your father, Richard. I know about Linda's real family connections. I know this whole thing was a setup from the beginning. Wait, David, let me explain. Explain? My voice turned ice cold. You want to explain how you seduced my wife? How you planned my murder? How you thought you could outsmart a man who spent 20 years hunting enemies of the state? Thompson bumped against a support beam. Trapped. His hand moved toward his jacket pocket, but I was faster. In one fluid motion, I crossed the distance between them and pinned Thompson's arm against the steel beam. I wouldn't, I said quietly. Whatever weapon you're reaching for won't help you now. From my own pocket, I produced my phone and played back the recording I'd made earlier. Thompson's and Linda's voices filled the air, detailing their murderous plan with chilling clarity. You see, Ryan, the thing about being in Black Ops is that you learn to always have a backup plan. And sometimes, a backup for the backup. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Thompson's face went white. You called the police? I called several people. The police are just the beginning. Hal Lake appeared at the far end of the factory floor, accompanied by 2 uniformed officers and a detective. David, everything all right over here? Just fine, Hal. Mr. Thompson here was just demonstrating how he sabotaged the press. Isn't that right, Ryan? The detective, a weathered man in his 50s named Clint Fuller, approached with his hand resting on his service weapon. Sir, I'm Detective Fuller. We received a report about attempted murder and industrial sabotage. I handed over my recording device and a manila envelope I'd prepared. Everything you need is there, Detective. Audio recording of the conspiracy, maintenance records showing the sabotage, and background information on both suspects. Detective Fuller's eyebrows rose as he scanned the documents. This is very thorough, Mr. Mathis. Almost like you knew this was going to happen. I had my suspicions, I replied. When you've been married to someone for 8 years, you notice when they start planning your funeral. Where's Mrs. Mathis now? Probably in her office, waiting for confirmation that her husband is dead. She was supposed to handle the paperwork, make sure the accident looked legitimate. Detective Fuller nodded to his officers. Johnson, secure this area as a crime scene. Martinez, let's go collect Mrs. Mathis. As the police led Thompson away in handcuffs, the man looked back at me with a mixture of fear and hatred. You think this is over? You have no idea what you're dealing with. My expression didn't change. Actually, Ryan, I know exactly what I'm dealing with. The question is, do you? 30 minutes later, Linda was escorted onto the factory floor in handcuffs, her professional composure completely shattered. When she saw me standing calmly beside the press that should have killed me, her legs nearly gave out. David, but how? You were supposed to be dead. I stepped closer to my wife, my soon-to-be ex-wife. Sorry to disappoint you, Linda. Or should I say, Linda Castellano. Her eyes darted between me and the police officers. I have to admit, you played the role of loving wife very well. For 8 years, I actually believed you cared about me. I don't know what Ryan told you, but he. Linda, you did. I pulled out another recording device. Would you like to hear your own voice discussing how to murder your husband? The part where you called me a washed-up factory worker was particularly touching. As her recorded words filled the air, Linda's face crumpled. David, please, you have to understand. I understand perfectly. You married me because your family needed someone with a clean background to help with their operations. You thought you'd found an easy mark, a simple military veteran who'd be grateful for your attention. Detective Fuller stepped between us. Mr. Mathis, we'll need you to come to the station tomorrow to give a full statement. Mrs. Mathis, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, and industrial sabotage. As the police vehicles pulled away with their prisoners, Hal Lake approached me. Jesus, David, I had no idea. All this time, you seemed so normal. I smiled grimly. I am normal, Hal. I'm just normal with some very specialized training. What happens now? Now? I looked around the factory floor at the machines that had been my world for 3 years. Now I start over again. But even as I spoke the words, I knew it wouldn't be that simple. The recording I'd made of Thompson's threats echoed in my mind. You think this is over? You have no idea what you're dealing with. I had spent 20 years in Echo Division, learning that enemies rarely traveled alone. Thompson and Linda were just the visible part of a larger network. And somewhere out there, people were going to be very unhappy that their carefully laid plan had failed. As I walked to my truck, I noticed a black sedan parked across the street from the factory. The windows were tinted, and it had been there when I'd arrived earlier, but it had moved since then. Professional surveillance. I got into my truck but didn't start the engine immediately. Instead, I used my rearview mirror to study the sedan. 2 occupants, both alert and focused on me. The license plate was government issued. My encrypted phone buzzed. With a text message from an unknown number, impressive work tonight, but the game is just beginning. Vincent Castellano sends his regards. I stared at the message, then deleted it. Linda's father was supposed to be in federal prison, but clearly his reach extended far beyond the prison walls. The attempt on my life hadn't been just about insurance money or a love triangle. It had been about eliminating someone who posed a threat to a much larger operation. As I finally started my truck and drove away, I caught one last glimpse of the black sedan in my mirror. It didn't follow me, but I knew that didn't matter. They knew where I lived, where I worked, probably everything about my routine. The factory worker, David Mathis, was dead, killed in that industrial press along with his old life. What emerged from that factory floor was something else entirely. Echo 77. And I was about to remind some very dangerous people why operatives like me were given numbers instead of names. The war was just beginning. 3 days after Linda and Thompson's arrest, I received word that both suspects had been released on bail. Their lawyer was Angelica Wise, notorious for defending high-profile organized crime figures. The bail had been set at $2 million each, money that should have been impossible for a factory manager and HR administrator to raise. But I wasn't surprised. I'd been expecting this. I sat in my kitchen reviewing files spread across the table. Using my Echo Division contacts, I'd compiled a complete dossier on the Castellano crime family. Vincent Castellano might be in federal prison, but his organization was very much alive. His eldest son, Antonio McDale, who'd taken his stepfather's name to distance himself from the family business, ran legitimate construction companies that served as fronts for money laundering and contract killing. The family had been trying to expand their operations into the Midwest for years, but they needed clean financial channels and someone with administrative access to facilitate their activities. Linda's marriage to me had been part of a long-term infiltration plan. My phone rang. The caller ID showed Detective Fuller. Mr. Mathis, I thought you should know. Both suspects made bail this morning. We did everything we could to keep them locked up, but their lawyer filed motions claiming insufficient evidence. What about the recordings? Their attorney claims they were obtained illegally. Without a warrant, they might not be admissible. I'm sorry, David. The system doesn't always work the way it should. After ending the call, I sat quietly for several minutes. The legal system had failed me, just as it had failed countless others who'd crossed paths with organized crime. But I had never relied solely on the legal system for justice. I opened my laptop and began typing, accessing databases that officially didn't exist. Within hours, I had current addresses, phone numbers, daily routines, and security arrangements for everyone involved. Linda was staying at a safe house owned by one of Antonio McDale's shell companies. Thompson had returned to his apartment, but with 2 bodyguards, professionals with military backgrounds. But I wasn't interested in quick, simple justice. These people had spent months planning my death, treating me like a disposable obstacle. They deserved something more elaborate. The next morning, I drove to the construction site where Antonio McDale's company was building a new shopping center. McDale himself was there, a tall, well-dressed man in his 40s who looked more like a Wall Street executive than a crime family heir. I observed him from a distance, noting his bodyguards, his routine, his vulnerabilities. That afternoon, I visited 3 different locations in the city, making seemingly random purchases. Electronic components from a hobby shop. Industrial chemicals from a janitorial supply company. Precision tools from a machine shop. To anyone watching, I appeared to be a man getting on with his life after a traumatic experience. But to someone with Echo Division training, I was assembling the components for something far more sinister. On Thursday evening, Linda called me. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to her message. David, please, we need to talk. I know you're angry, but there are things you don't understand. My family, they're not people you can just walk away from. They're coming for you, and I'm the only one who can protect you. Meet me at the old steel mill on Route 47 tomorrow night at 10 p.m. Come alone and I'll explain everything. I played the message 3 times, analyzing every word, every inflection. It was clearly a trap. But it was also an opportunity. Linda thought she was luring me to my death. Instead, she was walking into mine. Friday night. I arrived at the abandoned steel mill 2 hours early. The facility had been closed for 15 years, its massive structures left to rust in the industrial wasteland outside town. It was the perfect place for the kind of meeting that ended with someone disappearing permanently. Using my night vision equipment, I conducted a thorough reconnaissance of the area. I counted 6 men positioned around the property, professionals with military-grade weapons. Linda and Thompson were in the main office building, along with 2 additional guards. I smiled grimly. They brought an army to kill one washed-up factory worker. At exactly 9:45 p.m., my preparations were complete. I'd spent the past week studying the abandoned facility's layout, identifying structural weaknesses, and placing small charges in strategic locations. Nothing that would cause a massive explosion. I was more subtle than that. Instead, I'd created a series of carefully calculated collapses that would appear to be the result of the old building finally succumbing to years of neglect. At 10 p.m., I walked openly toward the main office building, making no attempt at stealth. Let them think they had the advantage. Linda was waiting in what had once been the plant supervisor's office, wearing an expensive dress that looked utterly out of place in the decrepit surroundings. Thompson stood beside her, looking nervous, but trying to project confidence. 2 guards flanked the doorway. Hello, Linda, I said calmly. Nice dress. A little formal for a murder, don't you think? Linda's facade cracked slightly. David. Thank God you came. We don't have much time. Your family wants me dead. I know. I looked around the office with apparent casual interest. This is quite an elaborate setup. 6 shooters outside. 2 in here with you. Very professional. Linda's eyes widened. How do you know about the shooters? Same way I knew about your plan to kill me. Same way I know that Antonio McDale is parked about a quarter-mile away, waiting for confirmation that I'm dead. Thompson stepped forward, trying to sound authoritative. You're surrounded, David. Just make this easy on everyone. I laughed. A cold, guttural sound that made everyone in the room tense. Easy, Ryan? You tried to murder me with an industrial press. You think I'm going to make anything easy for you? One of the guards spoke into his radio. Target is in position, awaiting orders. The response crackled through the speaker. Execute in 60 seconds. I checked my watch. 60 seconds. That's perfect timing. Linda frowned. What are you? Her words were cut off by a deep rumbling sound from somewhere. Below us. The building shook slightly, and dust rained from the ceiling. What the hell was that? Thompson demanded. I smiled. That was the first support beam giving way. This building has been scheduled for demolition for months, but the city couldn't afford it. Funny how these old structures sometimes just collapse on their own. Another rumble, stronger this time. The lights flickered and went out, leaving us in darkness, broken only by the emergency lighting from the guards' equipment. You son of a bitch. Linda snarled. What did you do? I gave you what you wanted, Linda. A workplace accident. Only this time, it's going to be your accident. The building shook again, and we could hear shouting from outside as the perimeter guards realized what was happening, but I had cut their communication lines and disabled their vehicles. They were trapped in a collapsing industrial facility with no way to call for help. The support beams are going in sequence, I explained conversationally as another section of the building groaned ominously. We have maybe 5 minutes before this whole place comes down. Plenty of time to have the conversation you wanted. Thompson pulled out a gun, pointing it at me. You're insane. Get us out of here. Or what? You'll shoot me in a collapsing building where my body will be crushed beyond recognition? That's not very smart, Ryan. The building lurched suddenly, and Thompson lost his balance. I was moving before the younger man hit the ground, disarming him with brutal efficiency. One of the guards tried to intervene, but my combat training made the fight laughably one-sided. Within seconds, both guards were unconscious, and I held Thompson at knife point while Linda cowered against the far wall. Now, I said calmly as another section of the building collapsed with a thunderous crash, let's discuss your family's plans for expansion into my territory. Linda's face was streaked with tears and dust. David, please, we can work this out. I never wanted. You never wanted what? To murder your husband? You seemed pretty enthusiastic about it on the recording. The building shook violently, and cracks appeared in the walls around us. I calculated we had perhaps 2 minutes before this section became uninhabitable. I'm going to give you both a choice, I said, my voice barely audible over the sounds of destruction. You can die here, crushed in an industrial accident just like you planned for me. Or you can spend the rest of your lives knowing that I'm out there watching, waiting for you to make another mistake. What do you want? Thompson gasped. I want you to understand something. I want you to remember this moment every time you close your eyes. I am not a victim. I am not prey. I am the thing that monsters like you should be afraid of in the dark. I stood up, releasing Thompson. The exit is through the back corridor. You have 90 seconds before the roof collapses. I suggest you run. Linda and Thompson stumbled toward the door, but Linda stopped and looked back, her eyes blazing. This isn't over, David. My family will. Your family will do nothing, I interrupted. Because they're going to be too busy dealing with their own problems. As if summoned by my words, my phone rang. I answered it calmly despite the chaos around us. Echo 77. David, this is Control. Operation Castellano is complete. Antonio McDale and 6 associates were arrested 20 minutes ago on federal conspiracy charges. The family's financial network has been frozen, and warrants have been issued for 12 additional family members. I smiled at Linda's horrified expression. Perfect timing. Thank you, Control. The FBI wants a debrief on your involvement. I paused. Tell them I'll be in touch. I ended the call and looked at my wife and her lover. Run. They ran. I waited until the sound of their footsteps faded, then calmly walked to a different exit, one I'd prepared earlier that would lead me safely out of the building. Behind me, the steel mill continued its death throes, collapsing in sections as my carefully placed charges severed key support structures. By the time the fire department arrived, the building was a pile of rubble. The official investigation would conclude that the structure had finally succumbed to years of neglect and weathering. 6 bodies would be found in the debris, Antonio McDale's shooters who hadn't been fast enough to escape my trap. Linda and Thompson survived, but they emerged from the rubble broken and terrorized. Their criminal network was dismantled, their assets frozen, and their associates either dead or in federal custody. As I drove home through the quiet streets, I reflected on the evening's work. Justice had been served, but not in the way the legal system would have provided it. This was Echo Division justice. Swift. Final. Absolute. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We know what you did. This isn't over. I deleted the message without reading it a second time. There would always be someone looking for revenge. Always another threat to deal with. But that was fine with me. After 20 years in Black Ops, I'd learned that peace was just the interval between wars. And David Mathis was very, very good at war. 2 weeks after the steel mill incident, I received news that would change everything. Detective Fuller called with an update that made my blood run cold. David, I thought you should know. Linda and Thompson were found dead in their safe house this morning. Professional hit. Very clean. Single shots to the head. No signs of struggle. I sat in silence for a moment. Any suspects? Well, that's the interesting part. The house was owned by a shell company linked to the Castellano family. But here's the thing, our investigation shows the hit was ordered from inside federal prison. Vincent Castellano apparently decided his daughter had become a liability. After ending the call, I stared out my kitchen window at the quiet suburban street. Linda and Thompson were dead, killed by the very people they'd served. It should have felt like justice, but instead it felt like loose ends being tied up. In my experience, when crime families started eliminating their own people, it meant they were preparing for something bigger. My encrypted phone buzzed. A message from Control, Echo 77. Immediate extraction recommended. Multiple threats inbound your location. I looked around my modest home, the place I'd shared with Linda for 8 years. Everything here was contaminated now, tainted by lies and betrayal. I packed a single bag with essentials and prepared to disappear. But as I reached for my car keys, I paused. Running was what the old David would have done. The factory worker who just wanted a quiet life. But the events of the past few weeks had awakened something in me that had been dormant for too long. I wasn't David Mathis, factory worker, anymore. I was Echo 77. And Echo operatives didn't run from fights. Instead of fleeing, I made a phone call to an old contact. Santiago Meyer. The voice on the other end was cautious. Professional. It's 77. I need a favor. Jesus, David. Heard you were out of the game. I was. Circumstances changed. I need intelligence on Vincent Castellano's current operations. Everything. Money flow. Ongoing contracts. That's heavy stuff, brother. Castellano's got federal protection as a witness. He also just ordered the execution of his own daughter. I don't think his witness protection is going to last much longer. Santiago was quiet for a moment. Give me 6 hours. And David, whatever you're planning, be careful. Word is there's a bounty on your head. $500,000. Dead or alive? Who posted it? That's the strange part. It came from outside the family. someone with serious money and serious connections. After ending the call, I began preparing my house for what I knew was coming. If someone had put a bounty on my head, professional killers would be arriving soon. This time, I would be ready. I spent the next 4 hours turning my suburban home into a fortress. Using skills learned in hostile territories around the world, I created overlapping fields of fire, established escape routes, and prepared defensive positions. To any observer, the house looked normal. But to someone with my training, it had become a killing field. At sunset, they came. I spotted the first team through my surveillance equipment. 3 men in a van parked 2 blocks away. Professional setup, good equipment, but they made the mistake of thinking they were hunting a civilian. The second team approached from the backyard, moving with military precision through the neighbors' properties. I counted 4 men, all carrying suppressed weapons. The third team was the most dangerous. A sniper positioned in a house across the street with a clear line of sight to my front door. 7 professional killers, all focused on one target. In the old days, Echo Division would have called this unfavorable odds. I called it a target-rich environment. I triggered the first trap as the backyard team reached my fence. The explosion was small but precisely placed, taking out the 2 rear guards without alerting the other teams. The remaining 2 men from that team rushed toward the house, thinking their comrades had triggered an alarm system. They ran straight into my crossfire. The sniper across the street realized something was wrong when his radio went silent. I watched through my scope as the man shifted position, trying to get a better angle on the house. But I had already anticipated this move. The sniper never saw the remote control device that I had placed in the attic across the street earlier that day. The small explosion brought down part of the roof, eliminating the threat permanently. That left the 3-man team in the van. They were the smartest of the bunch, staying mobile and using their vehicle as both transportation and cover. I could hear them on their radios, trying to coordinate with teams that no longer existed. I walked out my front door and stood in my driveway, completely exposed. The van's engine roared to life, and it accelerated toward me, the passenger window rolling down as the gunman prepared to fire. I didn't move, didn't take cover. I simply raised my own weapon and put 3 rounds through the windshield. The van veered off the road and crashed into a fire hydrant, water geysering into the evening sky. I walked calmly to the wreckage and checked on the occupants. All 3 were alive but unconscious. Good. I needed at least one of them conscious for questioning. 20 minutes later, the survivor, a professional killer named Hiata Washburn, was tied to a chair in my garage. Blood trickling from a head wound. Who sent you? I asked conversationally. Washburn spat blood. Go to hell. I showed him a photograph. Washburn's daughter at her college graduation. Beautiful girl, pre-med at Northwestern, right? Excellent grades, bright future. Washburn's eyes widened with fear. You touch her and I'll. You'll what? You're tied to a chair and your team is dead. But I'm not interested in hurting innocents, Hiata. I just want you to understand that I know everything about you. Your daughter, your ex-wife in Phoenix, your brother who runs that restaurant in Chicago. I could make all of them disappear, but I won't. If you answer my questions. Washburn sagged in his chair. The contract came through a broker, high-end stuff, very exclusive clientele. Who's the client? I don't know. It was handled through intermediaries, but the money came from overseas accounts. Very sophisticated operation. How much? 2 million. Half up front, half on confirmation of death. I whistled softly. Someone really wanted me dead. What else? There's more teams coming. This was just the first wave. Whoever wants you gone has serious resources. I untied Washburn and handed him a cell phone. You're going to call your broker and tell them the contract is complete. David Mathis is dead. Killed in the firefight. You're the only survivor. Washburn stared at me in confusion. Why would you? You're letting me go? I'm giving you a choice. Same as I gave everyone else. Make the right choice, Hiata. After Washburn left, I surveyed the carnage around my property. 6 bodies, a destroyed van, and enough evidence to keep CSI teams busy for weeks. But I wouldn't be here when they arrived. I placed a call to Detective Fuller, reporting a home invasion and multiple casualties. Then I gathered my few remaining possessions and walked away from the life of David Mathis forever. As I drove out of town, my phone rang. Santiago Meyer had the intelligence I'd requested. Vincent Castellano isn't just a witness, Santiago reported. He's been running operations from federal prison through a network of corrupt guards and officials. The FBI is about to lose their star witness in a massive scandal. What kind of operations? International arms dealing, human trafficking, money laundering on a scale that makes his old family business look like a lemonade stand. But here's the interesting part. He's not running it alone. He's got partners. People with government connections. I felt the pieces clicking into place. Political connections? Higher than that, brother. This goes all the way to the top. I ended the call and drove through the night, my mind working on the implications. Linda and Thompson had been small players in a much larger game. The attempt on my life hadn't been about revenge or insurance money. It had been about eliminating someone who could potentially expose a network that reached into the highest levels of government. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They tried to kill Echo 77. And Echo operatives had a very specific response to attempts on their lives. Total warfare. As dawn broke over the interstate, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to run, and I wasn't going to hide. I was going to war against the entire network, no matter how high it reached or how powerful its members thought they were. The reckoning had begun, and it would not end until every person responsible for the betrayal was dead or destroyed. Behind me, smoke rose from the ruins of my old life. Ahead lay a path of vengeance that would make my previous actions look like practice runs. David Mathis was dead. What emerged from the wreckage was something far more dangerous. A man with nothing left to lose and all the skills necessary to take down anyone who stood in his way. I drove for 3 days straight, using back roads and rest stops, staying off the grid while my former life burned behind me. The news reports painted the incident at my house as a home invasion gone wrong. 6 professional criminals dead. Homeowner David Mathis missing and presumed dead. Perfect. On the 4th day, I arrived at a cabin in the mountains of West Virginia, a safe house I'd established years ago during my Echo Division days. The property was registered to a deceased operative, untraceable to my current identity. Here, I could plan my next moves without interference. Santiago Meyer was waiting for me as arranged. The two of us had served together in Echo Division for 12 years before Santiago moved into private intelligence consulting. He was one of the few people I trusted completely. "You look like hell," Santiago said, studying my face as I entered the cabin. "Feel worse. What do you have for me?" Santiago spread files across the kitchen table. Vincent Castellano's network is bigger than we thought. It's not just organized crime. It's a hybrid operation mixing crime families with corrupt government officials, defense contractors, and foreign intelligence agencies. I studied the organizational chart Santiago had prepared. Who's at the top? That's where it gets interesting. The money flows through a series of shell companies, but they all trace back to 3 main sources. First is Castellano's traditional crime operations. Second is a defense contractor called Meridian Systems. They have classified contracts with DoD and CIA. And the third. Santiago's expression darkened. That's the problem. The third source appears to be a black budget operation run by someone inside the intelligence community. Someone with access to Echo Division files. I looked up sharply. What do you mean? Someone leaked your real identity to the Castellanos. They knew exactly who you were when Linda targeted you for marriage. This wasn't random. They specifically chose an Echo operative to infiltrate. Why? Best guess, they needed someone with your clearance level and background to access something. Maybe classified information. Maybe to eliminate other operatives. But the plan was always to kill you once they got what they needed. I sat back, processing the implications. How long have I been under surveillance? Probably since you left Echo Division. Maybe longer. Jesus. Santiago pulled out another file. There's more. I've identified 12 other former Echo operatives who died in the past 5 years. All supposedly natural deaths or accidents. All of them married to women with connections to organized crime. I felt ice in my veins. A systematic elimination program. That's what it looks like. Someone is methodically hunting down Echo Division veterans and using their own wives to do it. Any survivors besides me? Maybe. I've lost contact with 3 operatives who were supposed to check in with their handlers. They might be dead, or they might have gone underground. I studied the photographs of my dead colleagues, men I'd served with, trusted, fought alongside. All dead because someone had decided that Echo Division veterans were a threat that needed to be eliminated. I want names, I said quietly. Everyone involved in this. Every government official, every contractor, every crime family connection, all of them. David, this goes higher than we've ever operated. Some of these people have presidential access. I don't care if they have God's personal phone number. They killed my friends. They tried to kill me. And they're probably going to keep killing until someone stops them. Santiago nodded grimly. I thought you might say that. I've prepared 3 packages. Complete intelligence files on the major players. But David, if you go after these people, there's no coming back. You'll be at war with the United States government. Won't be the first time. Over the next several hours, Santiago briefed me on the network's key figures. At the top was Meridian Systems, a defense contractor run by a man named Darren House. House had been a CIA operative in the 1990s before transitioning to private military contracting. His company had contracts worth billions of dollars, and he'd been using those resources to build a private intelligence network. Working with House was Senator Brian Gaines, chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Gaines had access to all classified information about Echo Division, including personal files on every operative who'd ever served. He'd been providing that information to House's organization. The third major player was Lon McLaughlin, a senior analyst at CIA headquarters. McLaughlin had been using his position to identify Echo operatives who might pose a threat to the network's activities. They've been using crime families like the Castellanos as cutouts, Santiago explained. Keeps their hands clean while eliminating threats. What's the end game? Near as I can tell, they're building a private military and intelligence capability that operates outside government oversight. Think of it as a shadow CIA with no congressional oversight and unlimited funding. I stared at the files, my mind working through the implications. How many people are we talking about? Core leadership is maybe 50 people, but they've got resources across multiple agencies, crime families in 6 states, and international connections in 12 countries. Conservative estimate, they can field maybe 2,000 operatives if they need to. 2,000 against 1. Santiago smiled grimly. Those are better odds than some Echo missions we ran. I spent the next 2 days studying every file, memorizing faces, addresses, routines, and vulnerabilities. Then I began planning my campaign. The first target would be Lon McLaughlin, the CIA analyst who'd been providing intelligence on Echo operatives. McLaughlin lived alone in a Virginia suburb, worked regular hours, and had predictable habits. More importantly, he had access to the files that would tell me exactly which operatives were still alive and where they were located. On a Tuesday morning, I infiltrated McLaughlin's house while the man was at work. Using techniques learned in hostile territory, I accessed McLaughlin's computer network and downloaded terabytes of classified information. But more importantly, I installed surveillance software that would give me real-time access to McLaughlin's activities. What I discovered over the next 48 hours of surveillance made me sick. McLaughlin wasn't just identifying targets for elimination. He was actively involved in planning the murders, coordinating with crime families, and covering up the evidence. The man had personally ordered the deaths of at least 23 Echo operatives. On Thursday night, I paid McLaughlin a visit. The CIA analyst was watching television when I stepped out of his kitchen, having been waiting in the house for 3 hours. Evening, Lon, I said calmly. We need to talk. McLaughlin reached for his service weapon, but I was faster. Within seconds, the analyst was zip-tied to his chair, staring into the eyes of a man he thought was dead. You're David Mathis, McLaughlin said, his voice shaking. You're supposed to be dead. I got better. Now, let's discuss your hobby of murdering Echo operatives. Over the next hour, I extracted a complete confession from McLaughlin. The man broke quickly, providing details about the entire network, including plans to eliminate the remaining Echo survivors. There is a meeting tomorrow night, McLaughlin sobbed. All the major players will be there. They're planning the final phase of the operation. Where? Meridian Systems headquarters. They think they've eliminated all the threats. They're going to celebrate. I smiled coldly. A celebration. How thoughtful of them. When I left McLaughlin's house that night, the CIA analyst was still alive, but no longer capable of harming anyone. The surveillance software I had installed would record everything McLaughlin did and said for the rest of his life, ensuring the man could never again work against Echo Division veterans. But more importantly, I now had the intelligence I needed to end this war in a single, decisive strike. Tomorrow night, everyone responsible for the deaths of my colleagues would be gathered in one location. They would be celebrating their success, feeling safe and secure in their victory. They had no idea that Echo 77 was about to turn their celebration into a funeral. The final reckoning was 24 hours away. The Meridian Systems headquarters occupied 40 floors of a gleaming Washington, D.C. office tower. A cold, stark monument to the military-industrial complex's insidious reach into American politics. From my surveillance position in an apartment building across the street, I watched through high-powered scopes as black sedans and limousines arrived at the building's executive entrance. It was 8 p.m. on a Friday night, and the building should have been empty except for security. Instead, it was hosting what Lon McLaughlin had called the Victory Celebration, a gathering of everyone involved in the systematic elimination of Echo Division veterans. Through my listening devices, I monitored the conversations of arriving guests. Senator Brian Gaines stepped out of his armored limousine, speaking into his phone. Yes, all 23 Echo targets have been neutralized. We can proceed with Phase 2. Defense contractor Darren House emerged from another vehicle, greeting associates with handshakes and laughter. Gentlemen, tonight we celebrate the end of an era and the beginning of our new operations. I recognized other faces from Santiago's intelligence files, CIA executives, Pentagon officials, defense contractors, and crime family representatives. 53 people in total. All complicit in the murders of my colleagues. My encrypted phone buzzed with a message from Santiago. Surveillance confirms no Echo survivors remain in federal databases. You're officially the last one. I stared at the message. The last Echo operative. Every other member of my unit was dead, killed by these people who were now celebrating in the tower across the street. I typed back, not for long. At 9 p.m., the celebration was in full swing. I could see through the tower's windows into the executive conference room where my targets were gathered. Champagne flowed freely as they toasted their success and discussed their plans for expanded operations. What they didn't know was that I had spent the past week preparing this building for their arrival. Using maintenance access codes obtained from McLaughlin's files, I'd infiltrated the tower's infrastructure. Elevators had been rigged to malfunction. Stairwell doors were prepared to lock automatically. Fire suppression systems had been modified. Security cameras were under my control. The Meridian Systems tower had become an elegant trap, and everyone who'd participated in murdering Echo operatives was about to be caught in it. At 9:30 p.m., I initiated my plan. The building's lights went out floor by floor, starting from the bottom and working upward. Emergency lighting kicked in, but I controlled those systems, too. The executive floors where my targets were gathered remained illuminated. A bright beacon in an otherwise darkened tower. Panic began immediately. I listened through my surveillance equipment as confused voices filled the executive conference room. What the hell happened to the power? Security, report. What's your status? Elevators are down. We're trapped up here. Senator Gaines tried to take charge. Everyone remain calm. Building security will restore power shortly. But building security was in no position to help anyone. I had dealt with them first. Through the building's PA system, my voice echoed through every floor. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Echo 77, and I have a message for everyone attending tonight's celebration. Silence fell over the executive conference room. I could see faces pressed against the windows, trying to locate the source of my voice. You've spent the past 5 years systematically murdering members of Echo Division. 23 of my colleagues are dead because you decided we were inconvenient witnesses to your crimes. Darren House grabbed a phone, trying to call for help, but I had cut all communications. You used our own wives to betray us. You turned our homes into killing fields. You thought you could eliminate us quietly, one by one, and no one would notice. I paused, watching the fear spread across the faces in the conference room. You were wrong. The building shuddered as the first of my charges detonated. Not enough to bring down the structure, but sufficient to sever the building's connections to the outside world. Power lines, communication cables, water mains, all cut. The building is now completely isolated, I continued. No power, no communications, no water. The elevators are disabled, and the stairwell doors are locked. You are trapped 40 floors above ground with no way to call for help. Panic erupted in the conference room. Some people ran for the doors. Others tried their cell phones. A few attempted to break the reinforced windows. But I'm not a monster, I said. I'm going to give you the same choice I gave everyone else who betrayed me. You can tell the truth about your crimes, or you can die here tonight. I activated the building's internet connection and projectors. Suddenly, every wall in the conference room displayed the same image, a live video feed of me sitting in the building's security center. I'm in the basement, 40 floors below you. I have complete control of this building's systems. I also have terabytes of classified information that document every murder you've committed, every crime you've covered up, every law you've broken. Senator Gaines stepped forward, trying to project authority. This is terrorism. You can't, I can do whatever I want, Senator. You see, you made one crucial error in your planning. You assumed that killing Echo operatives would be easy because we're just soldiers following orders. But Echo Division operatives don't follow orders. We complete missions. I stood up in the security center, and the cameras tracked my movement. My mission is simple: ensure that everyone responsible for murdering my colleagues pays the price for their crimes. I walked to a control panel and placed my hand on a large red switch. This switch controls the building's emergency systems. If I throw it, every floor above the 20th will be flooded with halon gas. The same fire suppressant that's supposed to protect your computer systems. Halon displaces oxygen. You'll have about 4 minutes before you lose consciousness. 6 minutes before permanent brain damage. 8 minutes before death. The conference room fell silent except for the sound of panicked breathing. Alternatively, you can use the computer terminals in that room to type out complete confessions of your crimes. Every murder, every conspiracy, every act of treason. Upload them to the FBI database, and I'll consider letting some of you live. Darren House spoke up. You're bluffing. You can't murder 50 people and expect to get away with it. I smiled coldly at the camera. Mr. House, I spent 20 years murdering people for the United States government. I'm very good at it. The question is whether you're prepared to die for your crimes. Several people in the conference room moved toward the computer terminals, but House and Gaines tried to stop them. No one types anything. Gaines shouted. This is psychological warfare. He won't actually. I threw the switch. Halon gas began flooding into the executive floors. The conference room's ventilation system filled with the colorless, odorless gas that was designed to extinguish fires by removing oxygen from the air. You now have 8 minutes, I announced calmly. Choose wisely. Chaos erupted as people began typing frantically on the available terminals. Others tried to break down doors or smash windows. A few collapsed as the reduced oxygen levels affected them. Darren House and Senator Gaines held out longest, refusing to confess, even as their faces turned blue from oxygen deprivation. But eventually, survival instincts overcame loyalty to their conspiracy. One by one, detailed confessions appeared on the FBI database servers. Admissions of murder, conspiracy, treason, and countless other crimes. Evidence that would destroy careers, topple governments, and send dozens of powerful people to prison for life. When the last confession was uploaded, I turned off the halon gas and restored normal air circulation. Congratulations, I announced. You've all just confessed to federal crimes. The FBI will be very interested in reading your statements. But I wasn't finished. As the survivors in the conference room gasped for breath, I activated the final phase of my plan. However, confession doesn't equal absolution. You murdered 23 of my colleagues. 23 men who served their country with honor and died because you decided they were inconvenient. The building shuddered again as more charges detonated, this time severing key structural supports on selected floors. I'm going to give you the same death you gave them. A seemingly accidental tragedy that no one will question. The Meridian Systems tower began to collapse, but not all at once. I had calculated the demolition to pancake specific floors while leaving others intact. The executive levels where my targets were gathered would be crushed, but the lower floors would remain stable enough for rescue teams to eventually recover the evidence of their crimes. As I walked out of the building's basement, I could hear the thunder of collapsing concrete and steel above me. By the time I reached the street, the upper floors of the Meridian Systems tower were gone, reduced to rubble that would take weeks to clear. The official investigation would conclude that structural failure caused the collapse, a tragic accident that killed 53 people attending a business meeting. The confessions uploaded to the FBI database would be dismissed as fabrications created under duress, but the network responsible for murdering Echo Division operatives was completely destroyed. The men and women who had planned and executed those killings were dead, their organization shattered, their resources scattered. I stood across the street from the ruins of the tower, watching emergency vehicles arrive and rescue teams begin their futile search for survivors. My phone buzzed with a message from Santiago. FBI databases show all Echo operative files have been declassified and released to the press. The whole story is going public. I smiled grimly. Even in death, my targets had served a purpose. Their confessions would expose the entire conspiracy, ensuring that no one else would suffer the fate of the Echo Division veterans. The war was over. The reckoning was complete. But as I walked away from the destruction, I knew this was only the end of one battle. There would always be people who thought they could use and discard men like me. There would always be those who believed that power meant they were untouchable. They would learn otherwise. Echo 77 was no longer David Mathis, factory worker. I was something else now. Judge, jury, and executioner for those who preyed on the people who served their country. And I would be watching, waiting in the shadows for the next group of predators who needed to learn that some people couldn't be bought, betrayed, or broken. The mark of the serpent and dagger was more than just a tattoo. It was a promise of retribution that would follow anyone who dared to betray that trust forever. 6 months after the Meridian Systems tower collapsed, I sat in a small cafe in Prague, reading news reports about the ongoing investigation. The FBI had recovered enough evidence from the building's database servers to expose the entire conspiracy. Senator Brian Gaines had been posthumously stripped of his position and benefits. Darren House's defense contracts had been terminated. The Castellano crime family had been dismantled by federal agents. 23 Echo Division veterans had been avenged. But my work wasn't finished. My encrypted phone buzzed with an incoming message, new intelligence. 3 additional targets identified. Request immediate consultation. The message was from Santiago, who had established himself as a freelance intelligence broker. I typed back, location, Safe House, Prague, District 2. 1 hour. I finished my coffee and walked through the narrow cobblestone streets of the old city. Prague had become my base of operations, a city where cash transactions were common and questions were rarely asked. I'd established several identities here, each supported by carefully crafted backgrounds and documentation. The Safe House was a centuries-old building that had been converted into apartments. Santiago was waiting in a room on the 3rd floor, surrounded by computer equipment and surveillance monitors. You look different, Santiago observed as I entered. I had changed considerably over the past 6 months. My hair was shorter, my build leaner from constant training. Most noticeably, my eyes had hardened into something that would make most people uncomfortable. The factory worker, David Mathis, was truly dead now, replaced by something more primal and dangerous. What do you have? I asked, settling into a chair. Santiago activated a large monitor displaying photographs and files. 3 people who were involved in the Echo Division elimination program but weren't at the Meridian building that night. The first photograph showed a woman in her 50s with gray hair and professional attire. Viola Donovan, former CIA section chief. She was the one who originally identified Echo Division veterans as potential security risks. Retired last year with full honors, currently living in Switzerland. The second image was of a younger man in military uniform. Colonel Will Ellis, Pentagon Intelligence Liaison. He provided logistical support for the elimination operations, including cover stories and false documentation. Currently assigned to European Command in Germany. The third photograph made my jaw tighten. It showed a man in his 60s with silver hair and a distinguished bearing. Senator Ted Ingram, chairman of the Armed Services Committee. He authorized the black budget funding that paid for the entire program. Still in office, still voting on military appropriations. I studied the files for several minutes. Why weren't they at the celebration? Donovan was traveling in Europe. Ellis was attending a NATO conference in Brussels. Ingram was at a campaign fundraiser in his home state. Lucky for them, maybe. Or maybe they suspected something and stayed away deliberately. I considered this possibility. The three targets were all high-ranking officials with decades of experience in intelligence operations. It was possible they detected signs that their conspiracy was compromised and chose not to attend the Meridian meeting. What's their current status? Donovan is living in a villa outside Geneva, supposedly retired, but maintaining contact with several intelligence networks. Ellis has been reassigned to a desk job, but still has access to classified operational files. Ingram is running for re-election and maintaining his committee positions. I leaned back in my chair, processing the implications. These three people knew I was alive and active. They'd probably been expecting retaliation since the Meridian incident. They would be prepared, protected, and dangerous. I need current intelligence on their security arrangements, daily routines, and vulnerabilities. Already working on it, Santiago replied. But David, these aren't like the others. They're not criminals or contractors looking to make money. They're career intelligence professionals with government resources and decades of experience. Going after them will be exponentially more dangerous. They participated in murdering my colleagues. That makes them fair targets. Santiago nodded, having expected this response. Viola Donovan first. Why? She's the most isolated and potentially the most vulnerable, but she's also the most knowledgeable about Echo Division operations. If anyone knows about additional surviving operatives, it would be her. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Prague skyline. Set up surveillance on all three targets. I want to know everything about their lives, their habits, their fears. Then I turned back to Santiago, and he saw something in my eyes that made him unconsciously step backward. Then I'm going to remind them why Echo Division operatives were considered the most dangerous men in the world. Over the next 3 weeks, I conducted intensive reconnaissance on my targets. Viola Donovan's villa in Switzerland was a fortress, surrounded by private security and sophisticated surveillance systems. Colonel Ellis lived on a U.S. military base in Germany, protected by Army security protocols and never traveling alone. Senator Ingram was constantly surrounded by Secret Service protection and rarely appeared in public without advanced security sweeps. All three had clearly been expecting retaliation and had taken appropriate precautions. But I had advantages they couldn't anticipate. My Echo Division training had included infiltration techniques that weren't taught to regular military or intelligence personnel. More importantly, I had resources they didn't know about, other former operatives who'd survived the elimination program by going completely underground. On a Thursday night in November, I received a coded message at a dead drop location in Vienna. The message contained a single phrase, "The wolves are gathering." It was a signal I'd been hoping to receive for months. Somewhere out there, other Echo Division veterans had survived the conspiracy and were ready to fight back. The next morning, I traveled to an abandoned warehouse outside the city. Inside, I found 3 men waiting for me, faces I recognized from my time in Echo Division. Echo 42 reporting, said the first man, a tall, scarred veteran named Roshoff. Echo 99, operational, added the second, a compact, dangerously looking operative called Javier Kramer. Echo 13, ready for orders, concluded the third man, someone I remembered as Toby Lynn. I felt something stir in my chest that I hadn't experienced since the factory. A sense of belonging. Of brotherhood. These men had survived the same betrayal I had. Lost the same colleagues. Suffered the same losses. How? I asked. Roshoff answered. We've been watching each other's backs since the elimination started. When Santiago put out feelers through the old networks, we decided it was time to make contact. Are there others? Maybe, Javier said. We've identified 3 additional possibles, but they've gone so deep underground, we can't be sure they're still alive. I briefed them on the 3 remaining targets and my plans for dealing with them. The other operatives listened without comment, absorbing the tactical details and preparing for what they all knew would be their final mission. This isn't about revenge anymore, I concluded. It's about ensuring that what happened to our colleagues never happens to anyone else. Toby Lynn nodded grimly. The wolves are gathering, brother, and it's hunting season. For the first time in months, I smiled genuinely. I wasn't alone anymore. I had my pack back, and they had prey to hunt. The 3 targets who thought they'd escaped justice were about to learn that Echo Division operatives never forgot their own. And when they hunted together, nothing could stop them. The final phase of the reckoning was about to begin. The operation began at dawn on December 15th with 4 Echo Division veterans launching simultaneous strikes across 3 countries. It was the kind of coordinated assault that had made their unit legendary in the intelligence community, precise, overwhelming, and absolutely lethal. In Switzerland, I approached Viola Donovan's villa through the morning mist, my movements invisible to the sophisticated surveillance systems that Roshoff had compromised from a location 2 miles away. The private security team never saw me coming. In Germany, Javier Kramer infiltrated the U.S. military base where Colonel Will Ellis was stationed, using credentials that had been carefully forged to show him as a Pentagon inspector conducting a surprise security audit. In Washington, D.C., Toby Lynn positioned himself outside the hotel where Senator Ted Ingram was staying for committee hearings, blending seamlessly with the crowd of lobbyists and political operatives who filled the city streets. All 3 targets had been living in fear for months, expecting retaliation, but never knowing when or how it would come. Their paranoia had made them predictable, following rigid security protocols that actually made them easier to track. I was the first to reach my target. Viola Donovan was having breakfast on her villa's terrace when I materialized from the shadows like a ghost. Her bodyguards were unconscious or dead. Their radio communications severed. She was completely alone with the man she'd helped mark for death. Hello, Viola, I said calmly, settling into the chair across from her. Beautiful morning, isn't it? Donovan's hand moved slowly toward the pistol she kept in her purse. But my own weapon was already pointed at her chest. I wouldn't, I said. We need to have a conversation first. You're supposed to be dead, she whispered. A lot of people are supposed to be dead. 23 Echo Division operatives, for instance. But somehow they all died while I'm still here. Funny how that worked out. Donovan straightened in her chair, trying to project the authority she'd once wielded as a CIA section chief. You can't prove anything. The Meridian investigation cleared me of any involvement. The investigation cleared you because you weren't at the celebration. But I have Lon McLaughlin's files. Remember every email you sent, every operation you authorized, every Echo operative you marked for elimination? I placed a tablet on the table between them, displaying pages of classified documents. You want to see the order you signed authorizing my assassination? It's quite detailed. Subject represents significant security risk due to operational knowledge and psychological profile. Recommend immediate termination using spouse-based infiltration protocol. Donovan's face went pale as she read her own words. That was classified at the highest levels. How did you? Because I'm very good at what I do, Viola. And what I do is eliminate threats to national security. Which brings us to our current situation. My phone buzzed with a text message. Target 2 secured, awaiting instructions. Another buzz. Target 3 in custody. Ready for final phase. I showed Donovan the messages. My colleagues have just captured Colonel Ellis and Senator Ingram. All 3 architects of the Echo Division elimination program are now in our custody. What do you want? The same thing I wanted from everyone else involved in this conspiracy. The truth. I activated the tablet's recording function. Tell me about the other operations. Tell me about the foreign intelligence connections. Tell me about the politicians and contractors who weren't at the Meridian building. For the next hour, Viola Donovan provided a complete confession, detailing a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of the U.S. government and involved intelligence agencies from 4 different countries. The Echo Division elimination program had been just one component of a larger effort to control and eliminate independent military assets. When she finished, I uploaded the recording to secure servers in 12 different countries, ensuring that the information could never be suppressed or destroyed. What happens now? Donovan asked. Now you pay the price for murdering my friends. My phone rang. It was Santiago calling from Prague. All 3 confessions have been uploaded and distributed, Santiago reported. The intelligence community is in complete chaos. 6 different investigations have been launched, and there are rumors of congressional hearings. Good. Any word on the other possible survivors? Yes, actually. 2 more Echo operatives have made contact through the old networks. They're requesting extraction and protection. I smiled. 2 more of my colleagues had survived the purge, bringing the total to at least 6 Echo Division veterans who'd escaped the conspiracy's reach. What about our current situation? You have maybe 6 hours before every intelligence agency in the world starts hunting you. The confessions you obtained implicate people at the highest levels of government. Understood. I ended the call and looked at Viola Donovan. It's time to go, Viola. Where? Somewhere you can think about the 23 men you helped murder. Somewhere you can consider the consequences of betraying people who served their country with honor. I escorted Donovan to a vehicle where Roshoff was waiting. Similar scenes were playing out in Germany and Washington, D.C. as Colonel Ellis and Senator Ingram were transported to a location where they would face final judgment. The abandoned monastery in the Czech Mountains had been chosen carefully, remote, defensible, and completely off the grid. It was here that the 4 Echo operatives brought their prisoners for the final phase of their mission. The 3 architects of the Echo Division elimination program were secured in separate cells, each one soundproof and escape-proof. They had confessed to their crimes, provided evidence of the broader conspiracy, and identified additional targets for future operations. Now they would face the same fate they had imposed on 23 loyal operatives. Any last words? I asked Viola Donovan as I prepared the injection. She looked at me with a mixture of fear and defiance. You think this makes you a hero? You're just another killer. Maybe, I replied. But I'm a killer who keeps his promises. I promised my dead colleagues that their murders would be avenged. Promise kept. The injection was quick and painless. More mercy than Donovan's victims had received. Similar scenes played out in the adjacent cells as the other 3 operatives administered justice to Colonel Ellis and Senator Ingram. When it was over, the 4 Echo Division veterans stood outside the monastery, looking up at stars visible through the clear mountain air. What now, Astra? Roshoff asked. I considered the question. The immediate threat had been eliminated, but Santiago's intelligence suggested that other conspiracies were already forming. There would always be people who believed they could use and discard military assets without consequences. Now, we do what Echo Division has always done, I replied. We hunt the monsters that hide in the shadows. We protect the people who can't protect themselves, and we make sure that anyone who thinks about betraying America's warriors knows exactly what will happen to them. Javier Kramer nodded. The wolves are back in business. But we do it differently this time, I continued. No government oversight. No political interference. No civilian casualties. We hunt only those who deserve it. Over the next several days, the 4 operatives established a new organization, a private intelligence and enforcement network funded by assets they'd recovered from their targets. They recruited other surviving Echo Division veterans, expanded their capabilities, and began identifying new threats. The world's intelligence agencies never found the bodies of Viola Donovan, Colonel Ellis, or Senator Ingram. The official investigation concluded that they had fled the country to avoid prosecution for their roles in the conspiracy. But in the shadows, a new legend began to spread. Stories of men who appeared without warning, who could not be bought or intimidated, who hunted those who preyed on the innocent. Stories of operatives marked with the symbol of a serpent coiled around a dagger. David Mathis, the factory worker who just wanted a quiet life with his wife, was truly dead now. What had emerged from that betrayal was something far more dangerous. A man who'd found his true purpose in protecting others from the kind of betrayal he'd suffered. The mark of the serpent and dagger was no longer just a tattoo. It had become a promise, a warning, and a guarantee of justice for those who thought they were untouchable. And in the darkness, where predators hunted, Echo 77 and his pack were watching, waiting, ready to remind anyone who needed the lesson that some betrayals carried a price that could never be avoided or forgotten. The reckoning was complete, but the hunt would continue forever. In the shadows, the wolves were always watching. 1 year later, I stood on a cliff overlooking the Mediterranean Sea, reading a newspaper headline, "Congressional Investigation Exposes Massive Intelligence Conspiracy." The Echo Division elimination program had been fully exposed, resulting in resignations, prosecutions, and a complete overhaul of military intelligence oversight. My phone buzzed with a message from Santiago, new target identified. Former CIA director involved in human trafficking network. Interested? I looked at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Send details." Some people never learned that certain lines should never be crossed. But I, and my pack, were always ready to teach them. The hunt continued. And as this story quietly slips away into the shadows of your mind, dissolving into the silent spaces where memory and mystery entwine, understand that this was never just a story. It was an awakening. A raw pulse of human truth wrapped in whispered secrets and veiled emotions. Every word a shard of fractured reality. Every sentence a bridge between worlds seen and unseen. Between the light of revelation and the dark abyss of what remains unsaid. It is here, in this liminal space. That stories breathe their most potent magic. Stirring the deepest chambers of your soul, provoking the unspoken fears, the buried desires, and the fragile hopes that cling to your heart like fragile embers. This is the power of these tales. These digital confessions whispered into the void, where anonymity becomes the mask for truth, and every listener becomes the keeper of secrets too heavy to carry alone. And now that secret, that trembling echo of someone else's reality, becomes part of your own shadowed narrative, intertwining with your thoughts, awakening that undeniable curiosity, the insatiable hunger to know what lies beyond. What stories have yet to be told? What mysteries hover just out of reach, waiting for you to uncover them? So hold on to this feeling, this electric thread of wonder and unease. For it is what connects us all across the vast unseen web of human experience. And if your heart races, if your mind lingers on the what-ifs and the maybes, then you know the story has done its work. Its magic has woven itself into the fabric of your being. So before you step away from this realm, remember this: every story you encounter here is a whispered invitation to look deeper, to listen harder, to embrace the darkness and the light alike. And if you found yourself lost, found yourself changed even slightly, then honor this connection by keeping the flame alive. If this story haunted you, then hit that like button. If you want to join the fellowship of seekers who chase the unseen truths, subscribe. And ring the bell to be the first to greet the next confession, the next shadow, the next revelation waiting to rise from the depths. Because here, we don't merely tell stories. We summon them. We become vessels for the forgotten, the hidden, and the unspoken. And you, dear listener, have become part of this sacred ritual. So until the next tale finds you in the quiet hours, keep your senses sharp, your heart open, and never stop chasing the whispers in the silence. Take care. Good luck.